Hi there, guys. We'll just have patches that's professional there. We'll just ramble.
Throw professional out the window.
Hi, guys. Today we're going to be talking about thoughts. Are they real? So we're going to be discussing thoughts for sure, but I thought I'd throw a curveball out there, actually. So I felt like talking about something else today.
Okay.
Just popped in my mind this morning that a few questions, like who are we to teach? What do we actually know? Does what we actually, this is sideways, so I'm trying to read it this way. So, yeah, so I was wondering, these are questions that I feel we all should ask each other or consider within ourselves. Like, who are we to teach? What do we actually know? Does what we pass on to our children actually serve us or serve them? If we are suffering, what insight or knowledge are we passing on? Besides work ethics and basic coping skills, are we teaching our kids to fail? It's amazing how often parents, and when we're suffering ourselves, we pass on this suffering to our children without even realizing. So what are your thoughts, Linda, on these topics? I haven't sent you the list or what popped in my mind this morning. So, but on teaching and how we are ourselves and what we offer our children, what are your thoughts?
I guess every parent does the best they can with what they have. And but I think if you are insecure and you have a lot of issues that you haven't worked through, they definitely get passed on to children. I've seen many instances where you see kids that are anxious or worrisome or whatever. You look at the mother. It's usually the mother, because that's usually the main nurturer, and she very, very often have the same traits. So you can see.
It's interesting though. Yeah, I agree. I feel that you look at the parents that are anxious and their coping skills, and their coping skills, what they're telling themselves isn't working, and they may be on medication. I'm not against medication. Like, there's things people need to do for coping. So, but if you're on anything that changes the way your mind thinks or minimizes certain things you feel, and there's no judgments here because sometimes these things are necessary, then we're offering sort of a insight that doesn't work for us, essentially, to our children, hoping it works for them. So naturally it's going to be passed down.
Yeah. So kids often learn from observing parents. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest ways that they learn, not so much what you tell them, but from what they observe. And
my feeling is, yeah, I agree. My feeling is that children will learn or will imitate their parents without them even telling them much. Yeah. So they tend to take on their habits.
Exactly.
It's amazing how with parents, if the children's worried about something, don't worry about this, don't worry about that, just let it go, just forget about it. Yet this parent might be late or 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and yet what have they let go of? It's like it's what you're telling me that the remedy or what I should do hasn't worked for you. And if a child had more awareness, they go, well, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And the parent would say, "Is not."
Yeah.
But give it a go. It might work for you, or you may as well say, or in a sense, I've tried this; it doesn't work, and good luck. Almost like a better way to go would be, well, actually, good point. It doesn't. It's not really working, and that would, for myself, it spurred me on, and it has. This has been the biggest part of my journey, was things that didn't work. I went, I've got to find a way. I have to. It can't be like this. I don't want to live like this. So you begin your journey seeking answers, and you fall over quite a number of times along the journey. But each time you get up, you become stronger, and you get some deeper insight into possibilities of coping, and not just coping, but transcending, is in my experience. So this is spend a lot, your lifetime trying to not be so impacted by things, and becoming more resilient. And that isn't by, I feel, carrying more in your backpack, carrying more things with you. It's by actually letting it go. So I feel, it's a tough one if we don't know where the answers are. And you can go to professionals, and but there's a few things here where there's so many areas we can go into. There's many ways that can assist and unravel suffering, but we only seem to be drawn to do that the time we're suffering. And then it's often, and I've experienced this myself, and I'm sure you have too, where you'll try certain techniques, you go, it's working, I'm not suffering so much, and then you stop.
Yeah.
So the willingness is one thing, but as soon as you bring your head above water, I can breathe, and even though you're still fighting to swim, you stop that. You stop trying to get out of the water completely. So this is a trap in a sense. So it's then it just falls on coping rather than actual understanding, and you will never be free unless you can have a break from the emotional turmoil.
You see that with a lot of parents too. I think there's so many parents that know that the behaviour and their actions aren't always right. However, and because they are aware of it, they try to teach children something else. So it's just, kind of like do what I say, not as I do. But children will always go more for what they observe. So, so even though parents recognise that there's something they're not doing right, they don't always find a way to get around it. So they tell the kids the right way to do it, but they can't do it themselves.
But they might say do as I say, not, or might imply that, and they may not be aware that on some level that that's what they're saying. But it's like do as I say, not as I do. But they use the same techniques that I use. So it's like doing weight training. You train certain muscles; those muscles are going to get stronger. And it's like going to the emotional gym, the coping gym, and doing exactly the same weights as the parents, and saying, well, this is how it should work. This is what should go on. This is in theory what happens. But they're doing the exact same exercises. They're going to develop the same body, the same mind, the same emotions, and that will vary based on their character. Because there's exceptions to every rule, but the tendencies are going to be very, very similar, if not the same. So, and I feel it's only when you have enough suffering that you might go it independently for a while, and then you might embark like you and I have. So, as you've mentioned before, Linda, that you decided to go a different way from your parents, and looking for answers. So, would you say you were suffering at the time? Did you feel that you conformed to some degree, or you sort of didn't want to, or did it not work for you? What was it for you when you made the change?
Yeah,
like from your religion, talking about like when you changed from your following at 15, you made a choice. So typically, a child most often will follow the same choices as the parents, even if they're suffering, because of expectation, a few other things. But that expectation, it's living someone else's idealistic ways that hasn't been working for them, because a lot of people are suffering. So what was the difference for you?
Yeah, I saw things that I didn't agree with and I didn't want to be part of. However, it was hard because...
And what was that issue?
So with the Baha'is, the prayers are praying outwards. Like most religions, really, I guess, they're praying outwards. And to me, it feels like God is in me. And I found that some of them see, to me, my relationship with God is kind of like a parent and child. And to a lot of the prayers in Baha'is, they just keep on, I don't know, it's almost, to me, it felt like almost fawning to the God. Almost, the amount of accolades they throw out there is never ending. And I thought to myself that if God is my parent, I as a parent wouldn't want my child to go fawning around me and constantly putting me up on a pedestal. And so,
and in saying this, the Baha'i is not saying that it's necessarily outward. This is, and it's not obviously saying anything as a disclaimer, anything against the religion.
Yeah.
It's not saying that they're all outward. It's just that's how you perceived it.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So not saying because people often create outward for inner results, and they create outward. So that's something I feel it's worth noting for those that are going, there's no problem with any religion.
No.
The outward is a reflection of inward anyway, and vice versa. So,
no, it was just for me. It's just
from your experience.
Yeah, from my experience and my take on it. And also I found that there was other things that I just didn't agree with. They're very strict on, there's no alcohol, there's no sex before marriage.
You would have lost a lot of people there in those 2 points, without a doubt.
Should we edit that?
No, we'll leave that in there. So because you would have.
Hey.
Unless people switch it off, I come and buy high while I'm when I'm not drinking.
I'm not a Baha'i. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying though, but people that follow
they
that
were
religion,
listening. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, bang, I'm not. People might be curious, going, I'm going to look into that. And it's like, no sex, no alcohol.
Boom.
Yeah, no. Move on. What else is there? So, two crosses there. So, yeah.
Well, that's the thing with me. Initially I kind of wanted to go and experience life, and I didn't want any restrictions. And to me, if I am to say that,
so you wanted to be free to choose. In other words.
And experience life without feeling like I was constrained and had to hold back if that was something I wanted to experience. And it wasn't for me. But initially it was hard because my mum, I used to go out, after I was 18, I'd go out and I did drink. And initially my parents didn't agree with me not being a Baha'i because it was more of a image thing for my dad. He was very, very concerned about how he was going to be seen by the Persian community.
So how were your parents coping? And if any of this gets too personal, that's okay. Yeah. But how were your parents coping with their faith, their beliefs? Because if you assume if people, your role models, which is initially your parents, if they're coping well and handling things well, then that would be incentive to follow certain ways. It's not always the case though, because it depends on the perception of the child, and the parent may cope to some degree.
Yeah.
Okay, but if the child's not understood or doesn't feel valued in a sense or heard, and I feel the old way to some degree where children shouldn't be seen and not heard, and the trap with this where if we don't try and seek understanding of what our children think and feel and what they say, then they won't feel valued, and they won't feel, they'll be insecure, and then they start seeking it outwardly because they didn't get it from their parents.
Yeah, which I didn't.
Yeah, well, I think hardly any child on the planet actually, I'm not saying there's none, but there's a large number that didn't really get the nurturing that they felt they wanted.
Yeah.
And that balance.
Yeah, and I'm not saying there's any fault of their own, because I think I honestly believe that they did the best they could with what they had at that time. I think it was just, after coming to Australia, I came to Australia when I was 12 from Sweden, and I didn't speak the language. I mean, I have a very, very, very basic understanding of English, and I was kind of plonked in high school, and I had to fend by myself because my parents were quite busy trying to make a living and finding their feet in a new country as well. So they were quite occupied.
Yeah, they had priorities. They had to focus on survival.
Exactly. I don't begrudge my parents at all. I know they were struggling, and especially Mum. She was a qualified physiotherapist in Sweden and then come to Australia, and they didn't recognise a degree. And it was a degree she had done years and years prior. And for her to then be re-employed as a physiotherapist, she had to redo what she did, out of university. So that was, and then to do it in English as well. And so they didn't offer much in the way of her being able to do that as a profession over here. And then my dad as well, he was struggling with his family because they were here. And so they had their own issues to deal with. So
So how old were you when you came to Australia?
12.
12. So okay. So there's 3 key years there where they had to try and establish themselves.
Yeah.
And at 15, you would have felt that you weren't getting what you needed in a sense, understandably, but no fault in any direction.
No.
They had to survive. The first thing you do in a circumstance when everything's up in the air is survive, dig in, so to speak, so you get a sense of stability.
That's right.
That's natural.
Yeah.
But I agree completely that all beings are doing the best they can at all times.
Mm.
And some people might think, well, if someone's being harsh, or if they're hurting, or they're just, hurting others, or they're destructive, or they're angry, or projecting, all these things.
Mm.
It's like based on everything they have access to in that very moment, and this is even considering their emotional stability, the triggers within them, the fear within them, the anger and frustration within them, the things they haven't worked through, with all those things, and the more these things have accumulated, the more potent they feel in any given moment. The choices that they make, or anyone makes, is a choice while all that baggage is sparking and burning on their back, so to speak. So then they make silly choices. And the trap, in my experience, the more often you make choices that are out of integrity, the more the heavier the weight is on the back, and the more destructive and destruction you feel around you. So that enhances or promotes. If you don't reflect on what you're doing, if you're just purely shooting from the hip and being triggered, promotes more destructive thoughts. And before you know it, you've been destructive for years. And obviously so people are doing the best they can at all times, but at times when people aren't coping, then their decision-making is going to be pretty bad, to say the least.
Yeah.
And it can be, and when they're far enough away from themselves where they're so numb they can barely feel, that's my understanding, where people can possibly self-harm and do things. It's like any sense of feeling better than no feeling. And for that no feeling, I think of numbness, because I've experienced that, not self-harm, but sort of a feeling of numbness and disconnected. It's not, and I remember thinking, I just feel numb. It's a blank space, but it's not numb and it's not blank. It's actually a place of subtle suffering, in my experience. So that neutral, or so-called neutral space, or that numb space, there's like a dull ache in that place, and it feels cold. You feel alone, and it's not a place you want to get used to. And I feel when our teachers or parents give advice that they hope, and this is the thing, I feel a lot of parents, they don't realize, not really aware that what they've been doing, they're mirroring the teaching they were taught. Let it go, forget it. Certain things don't really reflect it. Hopefully this person will stop or change the environment, change the situation. And they say these things, they mirror these teachings that hasn't worked for them for maybe 30, 40, 50 years. And then they hope at some point it'll work for them. In a way, if you don't assess or evaluate the methods you're trying to use to cope through life, then you turn your back on a car that's heading for you, in a sense. It's just a matter of time before it hits you, before you get overwhelmed, and life becomes more suffering. So it's tragic in a sense to teach children. It's not necessarily values, but coping mechanisms that barely keep you above water. So what do we do instead? What should be done, you feel like, with parent and child? If your method doesn't and hasn't worked for you for a number of years, where do you go? This is the big question. Where do you go from there? Like, what do you teach them? If you're your strategy for coping in life or coping with certain situations or problems don't work, and your child or children are suffering, what do you do?
Something's
It's a tough
got
one,
to
isn't
change, isn't it? Something needs to change.
Yeah. So you can obviously seek professional help. That's one thing. What I would do, and depending on the situation, I'm not saying preference one or the other, but at the very least, like if the child feels like when they're immersed in suffering, they feel like they are on their own. Like I've experienced this growing up myself. I had anger issues and certain issues my family, my parents fought, and nothing personal either. That you get caught in the middle of their fighting, arguing, and not getting along. So when you feel that you're on your own and your parents don't get you, the parents almost like take on a facade that this is the way to do it, and like may not necessarily put themselves above you, but they it's like people say act your age.
Yeah.
You might be 30 or 40, and it's like, well, just be mature, act your age. It's like, well, you've never been there for a start that age before that you are in that moment. But it's just like behave in a certain manner, irrespective of what's going on. Just like a duck on a pond, we've all heard this. It's like, well, the ducks look the same, but the legs are going under the water. And just because there's an appearance of a duck floating effortlessly in the pond, that means nothing.
Yeah.
Really, because it's what's going on underneath the water. And when you say act your age, you're basically saying conform and be like the other ducks on the pond. And that's not realistic.
My dad used to say that all the time. And his version of acting my age was agreeing with him. That was
like mature. You need to be mature.
Yeah,
have an adult perspective, and even though my adult perspective is what society expects us to have, I'm actually miserable on the inside. I'm angry. I'm not happy. I'm not saying this is everyone. This is obviously quite a large share of the population, though. So, in what I feel within me, I've contemplated a lot of these things over the years, and I've gone through my suffering, and what I've discovered within me and certain things on which we'll tap on thoughts on another podcast. I feel that the first step is connect with your child that I understand your suffering. So even if you don't know the answers, if you said, well, it's hard, I get it. Like I've gone through this myself, even at your age, and to some degree now, even, and that seems scary. But let's try and work through it together. So if you say to a child, like if someone says to you, even at your age now, what are you, 62? No, I'm joking. So someone says, just I hear you. I understand. I've been going through it myself.
Yeah.
And if someone just hears you and appreciates you, then you're gonna go, oh, it's like you share the load, share the burden, and the burden of misunderstanding. So I really feel, and in my experience, that if you share the burden, as in say, it's hard, and I've spoken to people and offered some insight through my understanding that if you, and I'm not I've got my diploma in clinical hypnosis, I've done certain areas of psychology and stuff. I'm not a psychologist, but if you work as a team and if you share the burden, and if you prepare parent and child, so let's write things down. Like it's known, a lot of people talk about this, where write down your thoughts and feelings, write it down in a book, and so if your child is suffering to varying degrees, and you are as well, you don't pretend you're not and tell them to get over it. You're better off saying, let's both write this down. Let's get a journal together. Yeah. You have your journal, I'll have mine. We don't have to necessarily show each other, but this is really worked for me. It unravels the mind. It's like, well, let's write how we're feeling each day and compare, and you don't have to show me anything that you've written. But let's see how true it is. And in dark times, or when we're suffering, or if we're picked on, or something goes on at school or wherever, or with our friends, and any ultimate suffering comes from misunderstanding from yourself or others. So that means that someone's been triggered or misunderstood what you've actually wanted, or you're not feeling heard, so you lash out. it's all revolved around misunderstanding, in my experience. Everything, all suffering.
And I think
Obviously physical, but even physical, suffering or abuse is a misunderstanding of self, and that doesn't mean it's okay. It's never acceptable. But it's like even the abuser's misunderstood something, he's disconnected, or she's disconnected. So it still comes down to misunderstanding, and that doesn't mean you can actually force another person to understand. They have to be willing. Okay, thanks for listening to Awakenings Part 1, Episode 1 of We to Teach. Stay tuned for Part 2.